Hey everyone, it's Alex and welcome to Altered Academy. In this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive beginner's guide into the BRAVOS faction, specifically talking about the cards and combinations and the synergies within them to help you in your deck building. With that being said, everything gets started with the heroes, and Kojo and Buddha you're likely very familiar with thanks to it being the starter deck hero. It is a very straightforward hero to play. Much more limited in its synergies when compared to the other two, but still a pretty solid hero. Overall, I actually really like playing it, even though it has a very asymmetrical power curve with the Buddha obviously being a very significant power on the turns in which you have it. It's a very fun hero to play. Basira and Kaisamon are very synergistic with the boosted base cards. You have a lot of cards that want to get boosted. They kind of come in and out of the reserve. Some of them can kind of get rid of their fleeting effect. A very good card, especially in a deck and an archetype that really likes working with boosts. And then you have a Stadion Surge. This is kind of like your mana ramp style default hero. The reason for this is because BRAVOS, while kind of being identified as like this mono red style gameplay, which might have been felt that way with the way the starter deck was designed, but overall it actually has a ton of ramp options and mana ramp options that really kind of amplify its late game, and I think that you'll be surprised at just what this particular faction is capable of, especially from a ramping perspective, and a Stadion Surge tends to benefit from that. When talking about BRAVOS, we have to start with boosts. I mean, each individual faction has its own flavor and towards their deck building. In Ortis, you got that Zoo. In Muna, you got the Anchored Plants. And then, of course, you got Axioms, Landmarks, and Permanents. And then we got BRAVOS' boosts, right? We got tons of them, and we're going to be talking about them a lot. In particular, when we get to those gigantic cards, which you get to basically double dip with those boosts. But anyways, when you look at the cards available, they all have very interesting approaches as to how they can help you close out and win a game. I mean, physical training, awesome with gigantic cards. Something like an Atlas, great with seasoned cards as well. But mainly, it's like 2 for 3 boosts. That's pretty solid. And then you get the card draw on the rare, which, I mean, when you're working with as many fleeting cards as BRAVOS tends to work with, maintaining a hand advantage is very valuable. So I really do like this rare in particular. Then you have the Radisker. I mean, Radisker is interesting because you're getting that boost from the reserve. However, it's just equally statted. It's very fairly statted for its cost, and it's actually overstatted as a rare, getting the additional ones across the board coming in from reserve. You have the Tiny Jin, and this is kind of like your first ramping tool that you get to utilize, and it's awesome because you can decide, right? With Basara and Kaisamon, you could boost it right off the top, get it put down onto your kind of exhausted mana zone at the end of the turn, or you can play it and then play it from the reserve, and then when it gets boosted from reserve, and then instead of kind of going to the discard pile, it gets exhausted as mana, which is fantastic. And the Haven Trainee, while not particularly exciting, does have some boost ability from the bottom, and it's also notable it has an indirect boost, which we'll talk about later, but you also can discard it from the reserve to boost a specific card. And of course, we got tons others. Now, we have some out of faction boosts as well, which I think is pretty interesting. You have Asmodeus, which of course can be anchored or boosted depending on the role. You have All In, boosted depending on the role, and All In is really interesting because if you do something like a gigantic character into All In, suddenly you're looking at massive stats, right? The Haven Bouncer, it does get boosted from reserve, so you get 1 boost here, 2 boosts on the rare, and it is one of your core ways to sabotage your opponent's reserve. You have Sun Wukong, which is not only working with fleeting but also with boosts. The stock kind of common one does get 2 boosts when played from the reserve, and then of course it disappears. The rare, however, does lose fleeting when it comes out, which is a remarkable ability. Now, there is a lot of sabotage in this game, and you'd hope that your opponent would sabotage Sun Wukong if it can, but not only is it getting 2 boosts, but it loses fleeting, allow it to come in and out of play. Then we have Dracana, which of course is anchored, and at noon it gains a boost, and then you have some cards that can kind of re-anchor it, an out of faction rare, and something like a Bravati. And again, Haven Trainee, which is that there twice by accident? It just might be. Let's pretend that Haven Trainee is not there. Haven Trainee is actually supposed to be here on this one because it does have Indirect Boosts. Now, those were the direct boost cards that come out from reserve, from hand, that actually get boosted. Now, these ones here boost in other ways as a secondary effect. Haven Trainee, as mentioned prior, can be discarded from the reserve and can boost a card, and that will activate, the hero Basira and Kaizamon. And then you have the Vanguard, which a target character, the rare version at least, will remove fleeting from a target character, both from the reserve and from hand, and it'll also gain an additional boost, okay? An indirect boost. You have Issen, which can be discarded to give a boost, both as a common and a rare, and it actually can give a targeted character a boost from the reserve. So a very versatile 1 or 2 drop card depending on its rarity and its position. Chiron is one of my favorite cards in this, and I actually think that the stock kind of common one is really good. You do get to kind of get 2 targeted characters boosted up with the rare, but honestly, the stats are good enough here with the single boost on Chiron. I think there's a lot of versatility with this card that I really, really like. It's just a great card. And again, you get to indirectly boost individual cards on your field of play, and we have heroes that really like that. Kappa, once again, does have a seasoned effect, but from reserve can provide boosts. Haven Warrior, the same, can be discarded from reserve to provide a boost. So in the BRAVOS set, you're looking at a lot of cards that have these indirect boost effects, in particular from reserve. But again, Chiron is a little more direct. But overall, we have a lot of functionality in kind of giving targeted cards that you want additional boosts. And this can become handy, as I said, with some of the gigantic characters and a lot of other characters. And I kind of mentioned we do have some out of faction boosting that's happening. The All-In and the Asmodeus is a great example of like really solid out of faction boosts, and you're going to be rolling some dice, even with the Ouroboros Trickster as well, who again gains boosts, right? We also have Ozma. Now this is a bit of a unique fit. So if you have 2 or more other boosted characters from both hand and from reserve, you draw a card. Now, obviously, the condition can be difficult to meet. You don't have a ton of anchored characters, and so like you kind of have like this wide board. You have to have a lot happening. But I mean, drawing cards, that's valuable for something like BRAVOS, especially when you're getting aggressive, right? So Ozma is worth considering, especially when you're working with boosts. Then we have Season. I mean, listen, Season cards love getting boosted because they keep their boosts when they go to the reserve. The BRAVOS Pathfinder is a good example of this. A 2-2-0-3-3, decent stats, a little uneven, but really good stats overall. It's seasoned, and you can actually pay additional mana to give it additional boost. That's pretty good, right? You like that because now you play it down from your hand, it gets boosted, and it's going to stay seasoned when it goes to reserve. That's pretty good. Then we have the Kappa, also seasoned. Its stats, fair, right? But seasoned, no less, as a rare. And you also, again, can discard it from reserve to boost something else. And then we have a couple of the key cards. Now, these next 3 are the ones that people really fixate on when it comes to the seasoned boosting. First is red, okay? A 2-costed, 2s across the board, and it's seasoned, so it keeps its boost when it goes to reserve. And you get to pay an extra mana for the rare, but at dusk, if you have 3 or more boosts, you get to draw a card. Another draw mechanic. Now, 3 or more boosts is a lot, right? Like that's a lot to put on an individual card, but as you can see, there are so many forms of indirect boosts and opportunities to boost in this archetype that it's not like impossible to achieve. Challenging, yes, but it's definitely achievable. And then you have the BRAVOS Blade Dancer. I absolutely love this card. Actually, it's a great art piece too, and it's seasoned, but it starts with nothing essentially. It comes in for 1, and from reserve it gets cost 3, but whenever it enters the field of play from either reserve or from the hand, it gains a boost. And of course, if you have 4 boosts or less, it loses fleeting. So it gives you an opportunity to kind of like, make it nice and big and then lose the fleeting when it comes into the field of play and essentially be hey, you have to remove this target or you're probably going to lose the game. And then you have Atlas. Atlas as a common does not have seasoned. As a rare, it gains seasoned. And it's notable here that if you do something like on, turn 7, you do Atlas rare into the physical training, that's going to get buffed and it's going to keep its stats as a seasoned card, and it's going to affect the entire expeditions both sides. So Atlas really interesting as a combo play as a seasoned card because it helps you just kind of like stack those effects on top of each other, although of course it's a bit of a magnet for removal. And then we go to Fleeting. Now, Fleeting is interesting because we have a lot of cards in BRAVOS that tend to kind of operate within Fleeting to some degree. Helping Hand, which by the way is one of my favorite art pieces in the game. This and Sneaser Shroom kind of go back and forth. I don't know what it is about it. I just love it. I just love the art on this particular card. But Helping Hand is a really awesome card because it itself has fleeting, right? But a target character can gain boost and lose fleeting. And so if you start boosting characters up, especially the ones like, for instance, that we're drawing a card, right? Like red, you can actually remove the fleeting from it to kind of increase its opportunities to provide you with not only the boosted stats, but of course the opportunity to kind of trigger those effects that might be difficult to set up on their own. Sun Wukong, as we discussed prior, definitely operates within this fleeting mindset where it kind of discards its fleeting effect, giving you the opportunity to play it in and out over and over and over again. It is forecasted, it's expensive, but if your opponent does not have any form of removal or sabotage, you're basically playing it out, it's decently statted, and you're essentially building hand advantage over time because you're not expending your hand in order to keep Sun Wukong out. Of course, it's very easily disrupted. Pretty much everyone should have Sabotage, but if they don't, or you're going first and you're able to put them out right away, then suddenly it's a great piece to kind of gain an advantage. And then you have the BRAVOS Tracer, and I think that this card kind of sums up that very aggressive BRAVOS style of play. And you do get like good stats on the rare, and that's fair enough. But like even if you just look at the common, which is strong enough, 2/2 for 2, and then you got 3s across the board, and whether it comes from reserve or from the hand, it automatically has fleeting. So something like the Helping Hand on the rare would give you a very inexpensive and incredibly well statted card that you could use from your hand, get rid of the fleeting, and then you're able to use it from reserve, okay? So, and not only that, but it would be boosted in the case of the rare Helping Hand. And then you have Mulan. Mulan is just simply going to lose fleeting back and forth, not particularly well statted, a little bit on the weak side, but then again, it has that Sun Wukong effect where you kind of gain that hand advantage over time, right? And again, lots of sabotage out there, but it's a thing that you can do. And then once again, to kind of go along with the Helping Hand, you do have the BRAVOS Vanguard. You may have another character lose fleeting. You may, because you don't want to, target your opponent, for instance, right? And then with the rare, you give it a boost as well. And the stats are pretty solid too. They're not great, but losing that fleeting effect can be very valuable, especially when you have a seasoned character too, right? That might be fleeting with lots of boosts on it, and you just kind of, hey, get rid of that fleeting, and now I can play you 2 more turns as you go back to reserve, and you get to play out again, okay? So fleeting mechanics, very important in the BRAVOS faction. And to finish off the discussion about fleeting, we do have a couple other fleeting cards. We have the this big boy spell here, which basically reveals the top 4 cards of the deck. You choose 2 characters from these and put them into your expeditions. They have fleeting, and you discard the other cards. Very big, expensive play. Obviously going to be much more of a ramp style play there. And then you have the Lady of the Lake, which is joining the fleeting conversation simply because you're going to have to play a character like the BRAVOS Tracer. So the BRAVOS Tracer can't be sitting on the board and targeted. You have to discard the Lady of the Lake and then play a card with fleeting on top. And then we have the mana ramp. I discussed earlier that mana ramp is actually a big component of the BRAVOS kind of identity. And I think that was something that was missed in, like, when you look at the starter deck, you don't see that. You don't see that side of BRAVOS, right? It doesn't feel that way. And so you have to be like, oh, look at that other hero, and oh, look at these other cards. Like, this is actually a bit of a ramp archetype. And Gozen is fascinating because, like, it's very well statted, but it can only be played under specific circumstances. On the common, it has to have 7 mana on the board, or you have to have 6 mana orbs on the board. And I mean, listen, 3/3 for 2/5/5 is great. Obviously a little weak on the forest, but overall, like, a very well statted card, although it's very slow. And you're going to want to make sure your early game is shored up in the meantime, or else you're going to find yourself losing before you even get these cards out. As we discussed prior, the Tiny Djinn, a very versatile card. It's one of my favorite in BRAVOS because you're able to decide, at which point do you want to boost it right off the top? Do you want to, boost it early? Do you want to kind of bring it to reserve, play it again, and then have it boosted and turn into mana, right? A lot of mana ramp options in BRAVOS specifically. And of course, you do have the Mighty Djinn as well. And if I were to leave the Expedition Zone, you may put me in my owner's mana zone instead, okay? So you have the option. Right, you have the option to do so. You may put me in the mana zone. So really do like that. And with the rare, if you do not do that, you actually get to draw a card. So That's notable. Mana channeling as well. Put the top card of your deck into your mana zone as an exhausted orb. This is just straight up ramp, right? And again, you can, with the rare, you put 2 down. And then we have additional cards for mana ramp. These are out of faction cards. You do have Aja, which from hand, each player puts the top card of their deck in the mana zone. You could make the argument that if your deck is designed to ramp, this is a good thing, and your opponent might get disrupted by it to some degree. Although, of course, they are gaining an additional mana regardless. Then you have the mana reaping, where you can put a target character or permanent into its owner's mana zone. Now, this is valuable because, of course, you can do it yourself. Maybe you're winning a location or an expedition, I should say, and you're like, they gave up on it, and I have a character there that has fleeting anyway. It's going to go to the discard pile. I'm going to mana reap it. It's fine. But it also can be utilized as removal. So if they play something like a permanent or, like a brass bug hive, you're like, nope. You get rid of it. It costs 3. It will go into their mana zone, but you've essentially disrupted a key part of their play, right? So naturally, it's kind of a more expensive removal because it'll go into the owner's mana zone. So if you use it as removal, it'll go into theirs. If you remove your own, it'll come to yours. But versatile spell, a really cool card. Then we have Gigantic. I wanted to include all the boosted cards, and I was thinking about it, there's so many boosted cards that it's kind of hard to do this. So we'll just talk about Gigantic, and all of the boosted cards we talked about before can be utilized with these individual cards. Now, of course, we have Atlas, a relatively inexpensive card. You have Gigantic on the common, you have Gigantic Seasoned on the rare, and the opportunity to be discarded from the reserve to boost an additional card. Something as simple as Atlas into physical training is Gigantic, so it's across the entire board. And then you have the Chimera. The Chimera is not only Gigantic, but additionally it's tough. It's tough. So it becomes harder to remove based on essentially how far you are behind, right? It's the number of regions between your hero and your companion. So basically, the further you are apart, the more tough it has. And you get additional stats with the rare. It's a little more expensive, but you get way more stats. And of course, it's Gigantic, so you're adding a lot of pressure onto the board. And then you have the Son of Yggdrasil from Muna. Pretty well statted, but again, it's Gigantic. A little heavier stats when compared to the Atlas, but of course, a little bit more focused on that plant. One more expensive, but Gigantic nonetheless. Ultimately, any of the boosts you have here are great. Even if you have something as simple as kind of like an Isin, right? And it's great because it can be in your reserve late in the game and you discard them, right? You discard it and then you're able to kind of boost the Atlas or the other Gigantic cards. All of these cards can have that effect for the most part. All of these indirect boosts can kind of do that. And again, it's inexpensive to buff something with Chiron. Now, obviously the physical training is a little more apt at being targeted in that way from a combo perspective, right? And if you really want to go vertical, you can even use something like All In, right? So tons of different options with regards to how Gigantic cards are played out. And ultimately, a big part of the BRAVOS strategy when it comes to boosting and, of course, mana ramping is getting these chonky boys out here. And then we have the tough cards, right? I was going to kind of include them together. Obviously, we talked about some tough cards prior, but you have the Chimera for the reasons we talked prior, has tough. You also have Shenlong, which is a singular, very large kind of character. But the rare is increasingly large, but also gets tough 1, which makes it a little more expensive to target and remove. And you have Achilles, which once again is a 5/5 for 5. With tough 1, and it gains tough 2 with some additional statistics in mountain and water, okay? Tough can be very useful, in particular with matchups that have a lot of removal in them. And hey, if you're going to invest in a very large character, you're going to want to make sure it's protected. When it comes to permanence is not the strong suit for BRAVOS. We do have the Haven, which is good, because obviously it does boosts, right? Anytime you're coming out of reserve, you're getting a boost. And, obviously you have the resupply effect here with the Haven coming in and out, right? Which is great. You love to see that extra hand generation that BRAVOS occasionally lacks. With regards to the Foundry and the cylinder here, these are kind of unique in the sense that obviously the cylinder, if you spend one of my counters, you get to add a boost to a next character you play. that is very synergistic with these boosted style strategies, right? And of course, you have the next character you play from your hand activates its from reserve ability, which can be valuable because a lot of the characters that you are playing in Bravos do have these on reserve boosts, right? Even like something like a Tiny Djinn, right? You can exhaust the Foundry, play the Tiny Djinn, and boost it right off the top to get it to your mana earlier, right? And then you have the Tough 2, the Spindle to protect your large characters. You'd use this in a ramping style strategy. You'd play this out, ramp very aggressively, put big chonky guys out there that can't be removed very effectively because they have Tough. This has Tough, right? And all of a sudden your Ysmir player's like, man, I can't afford this removal. Like it's kind of like it's a disaster. And of course the 3 Little Pigs, which likes landmarks. But I don't know how much I'll be playing 3 Little Pigs. Then we have Removal and Disruption. Surprisingly a decent amount in Bravos, not known for its removal and disruption, but Intimidation is a pretty good one. I do like it a lot. Return target character or permanent with hand cost 4 or less to its owner's hand. Obviously it doesn't get discarded, but this can be very useful to kind of like, hey, I want to win a location. They've anchored some Sneezer Shroom and it's getting boosted like crazy, and I just send it to hand, right? And the Moon of Heroes like, well, I can't re-exhaust. I've already used my boost, so I guess that's just wasted. And so Intimidation has these opportunities to be very disruptive, which I do appreciate. You have Mana Eruption as well. You get to now this is where you use some of your ramping, but not necessarily with your characters. You're able to discard your mana orbs and then discard a target character or permanent, right? So you're able to kind of do this offensive. You kind of sacrifice some of your energy and get rid of something, and that can be particularly valuable. Less expensive. With the rare Twinkle Twinkle, a little bit of a sleep. You like using a sleep both offensively, and you could use it defensively as well. If you've won a location and something has fleeting, and you're like, well, we've clearly won there. They have nothing else to play. I'm going to put something that's fleeting to sleep, so they stick around for that next round, right? Especially if they're boosted. Mana Reaping, really cool. We've talked about this before, about the way it can be used offensively. And then you have Dorothy Gale. I like this from Ysmir out of faction. Basically sending a target character to reserve. Not necessarily a high-powered card from a statistics standpoint, but it comes down and it essentially says, nope, you're gone. See you later. Removed. And Sakubaru, of course, does force the wherever location or region you play into will move back one. It's a very expensive effect, make no mistake. But if you're ramping, right, you want to play this card because like you're ramping out very aggressively, and then you play this to give yourself a little bit more breathing room to take advantage of the mana discrepancy you've built, right? Because without Sakubaru, you might find yourself, hey, I got to like 9 mana and I'm dead, right? Because your opponent's able to kind of keep that gas on you, right? They're able to kind of attack you with fervor. Sakubaru, you're able to take advantage of that ramp and kind of set back the game a little bit, kind of create a little bit of a delay, right? So that's why it's particularly valuable in these decks. In terms of Sabotage and Disruption, we do have the Ortis Spy. It actually will create an Ortis Recruit. You have the Council, sorry. It's like, yeah, we have the Xbox and PlayStation here. We do have the Council, and the Council does have its disruptive effect. So if you hate bureaucrats in Ortis, if you really want, you can play some bureaucrats in the Bravos faction as well. The Tooth Fairy, a little bit of extra sabotage for you, not the greatest stats. And of course you have Tanuki as well for the additional sabotage. A lot of sabotage here. And much of it's out of faction rare nonetheless. Now we talk about independent cards. There's one I want to kind of mention. The interesting thing about Parvati is that, like, yes, you can seek to anchor like gigantic characters, but it's kind of priced in such a way that that's kind of hard to do, even from reserve. Like Atlas is still expensive, and you'd have to have a lot of mana to anchor it in place, and maybe you can, and that's pretty damn cool, but it might not always work. But like, here's a good example, right? You have the Bravos Blade Dancer. Okay, it's seasoned, the rare. If you have 4 boosts or less, it loses fleeting, so it's able to kind of come in and out, and then all of a sudden, it's a 3/4. It loses, it gains fleeting. It stays with fleeting, right? Because it has more than 4, boosts on it, and you're like, I don't want to lose it yet. It's doing great, Parvati, right? And you anchor it in place, right? Or you use some of your other kind of fleeting removal based abilities. But at the end of the day, this Blade Dancer becomes a valuable asset that is relatively inexpensive. And using Parvati to anchor it in place, or anchoring a gigantic character, can be particularly valuable. A little niche with its application. We don't have lots of like anchoring effects. I mean, we do have the Hatter as well, I guess, but this one is specifically for hand cost of 3, whereas Parvati can target gigantic and larger characters. The Hatter is more targetable towards something like a Blade Dancer, of course. But either way, you don't have a lot of anchored, but you have some options. You have the resupply here of the Axiom Salvager. You don't have a lot of hand generation in this particular faction, so you can consider playing this here. Katsuni straight up drawing a card, but it is kind of mirrored on both sides. And you have the Foundry Armor, which creates the brass bugs. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I do hope that this video helped you. I tried to do a quick breakdown of kind of how things work together and the general feel for building a Bravos deck and kind of how these cards function together. I got another video for you on the screen, and we'll see you on that next one.